few other things I'd like to show you. You see that Q there, there's two different Qs. And the way those got there is that this Palatino Linotype, an open type font with lots of alternates, in my character control panel at the top, if I click on the options, you can see the discretionary ligatures is selected. What discretionary ligatures does is, if I have a Q here and I type a U, it automatically goes to the ligature. Let's have a look at the glyph palette. You can see I have a Q and I have a QU ligature. If I turn off in my options, open type discretionary ligatures, and just type QU, I get QU without the ligature. In metal type, this would be something that would have to be cast on a single body. But with open type font, I can get that effect simply by turning on open type discretionary ligatures. It will automatically change it to the ligature. I also have access to historical forms. At the time of the American Revolution and the beginning of the United States, type was typically set with these historical forms. They weren't historical then. This was the common way of setting type in that era. Open type discretionary ligatures off. I type CT or ST or FFL. So I seem to be running out of room. Let me show you one more thing. I should be using a page that goes the other way. So if I want to change the orientation, I can go Command Option, or on the PC Control Alt P to get my document set up again and change my orientation. All right, that's better. Here I have CT, ST, FFL. If I turn on open type discretionary ligatures is on, CT, ST, FFL. On my glyph palette, I have lowercase c, I have small cap c, and if I type C followed by a T, it gives me the ligature. If I turn open type discretionary ligatures off, I just get the C and the T. Historical ligatures. There's your historical ligatures, CT, SP, ST, FI. Most fonts, even the limited character set in the earlier Adobe Type 1 and TrueType fonts, generally had an FI and FL ligature, especially for serif typefaces, where if you had an F and an I and it wasn't designed as a ligature, there's a pretty good chance. Turn off ligatures here. Let me pick a Caslin. Okay, that doesn't look too bad here, but if I had this in a smaller size, it would probably appear that the F and the I are running into each other. Let me just set this to 0 kerning, and you can see that you get what will appear like sort of a blob there in a smaller type size, but if you have the ligatures turned on, it will automatically convert to this, a typical FI ligature, or FL. Same problem if you have it turned off and I type an FL, that's not really aesthetically pleasing. So that's a bit about ligatures and discretionary ligatures. These are standard ligatures in Adobe Caslin. In Palatino, discretionary ligatures. Oh, that's interesting. That's the interrobang. It's a sort of a combination of the question mark and the exclamation point. Is sort of an exclamatory question, the interrobang. Historical ligatures. I'd also like to show you the 4 number styles, because you should know that when you had an 8-bit font that only had one style of numbering in it, it was always what we call tabular lining. Tabular meaning that every number is the same width so that they will align correctly in tables, like financial statements, menus, price lists. Anytime you have something with numbers, especially if they're big numbers like hundreds, thousands, millions, you want the decimal columns of the numbers to always line up vertically. Lining because they align to the capital height. For example, these are the default number style. You go to the options here, open type number styles, default figure style, and that is tabular lining. You'll note that there seems to be more space between the 1 and the 2 than any other numbers. If I change this to open type, proportional aligning, the numbers look the same, but the spacing is more consistent with the spacing of lowercase letters or capitals. And actually, let me do this as metrics, so you've got the default spacing, metrics. But sometimes you might like old style figures, because if you're setting a lot of numbers within a paragraph of text, these lining numerals tend to stick out like a sore thumb. Same reason if you have a lot of abbreviations in text, for instance, MD, LLD, or similar abbreviations, they usually look better as small caps if they're in a body of type. So I also have old style figures which look more like lowercase letters. They have ascenders and descenders, open type, proportional old style, because we're doing this in text. And those look better within a paragraph. But you could also use those to set type in columns by choosing open type, proportional old style. So those are your 4 figure styles. And the default, in most fonts, the default is generally lining tabular, and if no other options are available, it is just about always lining tabular. One more thing I'd like to show you is about horizontal scaling of type and why it can be a bad idea. Optical kerning for this so it looks better as display type, because at the size you're looking at it here, this is display. I have here my Palatino Linotype towel twice, and I have Helvetica twice. So this is normal. If I horizontally 75%, it doesn't look that good. And the reason is that, again, the design of letters is based on optical phenomena. And what appears to be a horizontal stroke and a vertical stroke that are the same weight, horizontal strokes are always lighter than vertical strokes, even in something that looks like a uniform line weight type design. And that's because a horizontal line always appears to be thicker than a vertical line. If I made these actually the same thickness, if I went to about 90% on this, a little less, about 88 maybe. I'm going to draw a perfect square here and scale it up pretty close, 87. The actual relationship of the horizontal stroke to the vertical stroke in a Helvetica capital T is that the vertical stroke is about 11% wider than the horizontal stroke, or the horizontal stroke is about 87% of the thickness of the vertical stroke, and it doesn't look quite right. You can see at this size, the vertical stroke looks thinner than the horizontal stroke. Here, where I have condensed the font to 75% of its normal set width, this looks really bad because the horizontal stroke is much heavier, much wider than the vertical stroke. And you'll also start to see things that don't look quite right in the proportions of other letters. If I make this about 65%, where the curve of the O or the E is going across, you might say that the horizontal component of it, it's now much thicker than the vertical parts. And that just doesn't look right. The W also looks a little bit strange. I'm going to leave that there. This one here, I'm going to make sure this is set normally. I've changed this to an actual condensed version of Helvetica, designed by the foundry, by the type designers, to look correct as a condensed font. I'm going to extend this one to where it's the same width as the true condensed. And you can see that there are differences in how the letters are formed to correctly condense them. The horizontal elements of a stroke, whether it's where the O goes across here, or the underside, or the E, the crossbar on the E, the crossbar on the T, these are drawn to look correct with this condensed version of the letter forms, the condensed glyphs. Whereas this one, this big slab on the top of the T does not look right. The fact that the E starts to get more egg-shaped and is fatter at the top and the bottom just doesn't look right. Same for the O, fatter at the top and the bottom, where it's actually a little larger, even at 80%. At 80%, the horizontal component of the stroke of the O may be about equal in size to the vertical parts, but it doesn't look right. It always looks fatter. Optical phenomena. That's why it's usually a bad idea to horizontally compress type. I'll do the same thing with this Palatino Linotype, make this of 80%. It's a little strange, it almost works. It doesn't look quite right. There's odd things about the proportions of it, but you can get away with it easier with a serif typeface than you can with a sans serif typeface. That's why I generally don't optically scale type unless it's in really small increments, because I'm desperate to get something to fit. I want to talk a little bit about the ellipsis marks. This is an ellipsis character, and these are available in a lot of fonts. It doesn't have to be an open type font for it to be there. I see them used a lot in Microsoft Word documents. You go to punctuation in my glyph palette, and you'll see it right there. There's a 2 dot and a 3 dot ellipsis. I've read some authors on typography that say this is better because in a page of text where you've got a nice even color to a well-designed page, this doesn't stand out. It blends in better with the rest of the page. The problem I have with that is the point of ellipsis marks is to indicate that there's a gap in whatever is quoted, and so I want the gap to be obvious. It's real obvious if you separate your ellipsis marks with a whole word space or a space band, because these are actually flexible spaces. If I did Command Option X or Control Alt X on the PC, that would be a fixed space, or in the type pull down, insert white space, non-breaking space. This is still a space band, but it's a non-breaking space. And if I use this one, that's a fixed with non-breaking space. Assuming I'm setting it in text, I'd probably use a whole space. But the thing is, these to me look too loose. So what I use is a thin space, and that's the indication there for a thin space. I'll actually reduce the lead on this so that it'll look closer together for you. Oh, this is important. Notice I just changed to my hand tool. Anything else you're doing in Illustrator or InDesign, I don't do a lot of typography in Photoshop because it's not really a type program. Type's available. I might use it if I have to stick some little bit of type into a picture. If you're in a type tool, you can't use the space bar to get the hand. If you're in a selection tool or a shape tool or something else, you can use the space bar to get the hand. But if you're in a type tool and you push the space bar, you get a space. So I want to move this, I'll use the hand tool. So this is the single character ellipsis. This is alternating with word spaces. This is alternating with thin spaces. These are Command Option Shift M or Control Alt Shift M on the PC, or in the type pull down, insert white space, thin space. If I do something where I have to use a lot of ellipsis marks, even if it's just once, something ellipsed before a section of a quote and something ellipsed after it, then I'll just Command C copy and Command V paste to get in at the other side. In a paragraph of text, this looks better to me than this one. Some of these are aesthetic considerations that you would explore more thoroughly in one of our type courses.